Hello, Year 5. I'm going to talk to you today about metals. Metals are one of the three materials that we will use in design and technology, the other two being wood and plastic. Your first project, your first practical project when you come back as Year 6s will be a plastic-based project, and there will be wood projects to follow. And in Year 7, you will be making one of these. Now, this is designed to go in a garden, or it could go on a windowsill or anywhere where it's windy. And what happens is that the wind blows this propeller and it makes the tail of the parrot go up and down. So we've got a crank mechanism in here. And if you remember back to the beginning of Year 5, you did a little levers mechanisms project where you made the two levers cardboard model. Well, this is a crank mechanism. We've got an acrylic parrot on the top there. That's been laser cut for you. But this is made out of a kind of metal called aluminium, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that particular metal was chosen for this project. So this is a little bit about metals. You don't have to do any work from this video. If you want to go off and do a little bit of research yourself, then by all means do. But I don't want you to expect to think that you've got to do some work from watching this video. It's just information. So I'm just going to show you a few things and tell you a bit of information about metals. Okay. So where do metals come from? Well, I've got a piece of rock here that has been mined from the ground, and this is known as ore, O-R-E, metal ore. So in this rock, you've got elements of metal, and what happens is the rock is crushed up, and then the metal seams are melted down into liquid metal and then poured into molds or poured into shapes or turned into objects. So that is a lump of ore. We get that from the ground. So metal starts out by being mined, a bit like oil for plastic. That comes out of the ground as well. So that's a lump of ore, and I'll let you pass that around so you can see the little seams of metal in there. You can actually see it's starting to go a little bit rusty. But if you think back to your history lessons, you'll have heard of times that are named after the metals that people were using at the time. So you'll have heard of the Iron Age, and you would have heard of the Bronze Age. So human beings have been using metals for thousands and thousands of years. And like I say, they're mined, they're crushed down the rocks, and they are melted, and then they're formed into shapes. Now, all metals, whatever they are, can fit into three categories or three families. So the first family you would call ferrous metals. Now, these are any metals that have iron in them, and this includes probably the most well-known metal that we use today, and it's certainly the metal that is used more than any other on this planet, and that is steel. Now, steel comes in many, many different variants, but probably the one that is used more than any other would be mild steel. So, for example, when you see a building being put up, the first thing that goes up would be the metal structure, the metal frame, and that would be made out of items called girders. Your house probably has got a metal frame before the bricks then go up around the sides and the roof goes on. So mild steel used for car bodies, used for saucepans, used for many, many different uses. I've got a steel hinge here. The only problem with steel and any ferrous metal is that it can rust. So if you leave this outside in the moisture, it will eventually rust. So that's a downside of ferrous metals. The tool cupboard behind me, anything that is metal in there is made out of steel, but it's a hardened steel. So this is a steel that's been heated up and cooled and heated and cooled. It's a process called annealing, and it makes the steel harder. So everything in that tool cupboard, whether it's a tenon saw, whether it's the head of a hammer, whether it's the part of a screwdriver, or whether it's one of the drills, is special hardened tool steel. So that's a much, much tougher version treated in some way, it can rust. So that's ferrous metals. The second family are non-ferrous metals. So you can probably guess from that these don't have any iron in them. So therefore, they don't rust. And they tend to be metals that have quite a wide range of uses. One that I can talk about straight off is, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is a little piece of copper wire. Now, copper is used for many things. 1p, 2p pieces in your pockets that will be made out of copper. And if you've ever seen them when they're brand new, they're really, really shiny before people's fingers, start to dull them down. But they don't rust. They will not rust. But another thing about copper is it's fantastic at conducting electricity. So electricity will go through copper better than any other metal. So take it from me, without cutting any wires, but your wires, in your television set and your computers and chargers and all things like that, they will be copper because they conduct electricity really, really well. Another great thing about copper is it's a really good insulator, which means it keeps heat in. So somewhere in your house, there is probably a water tank or a boiler. Usually it's got some kind of padded jacket on it to keep the heat in. But if it's a modern boiler, that will be made out of copper because it keeps the heat in and it will keep the water hotter for longer. There's a nice bit of copper there. So obviously, like I said, the wire inside your electrical wires will be copper. I've got a piece of brass here. Brass is mainly used nowadays as something decorative. If you go to your doctor's surgery, there's usually a brass plaque outside with the name of your doctor on. And if you polish it up really nicely, it can look really, really good. So that's a piece of brass that you might find hanging up in a pub or in an antique shop, and it has dulled down a bit, but it will never rust. Precious metals are non-ferrous metals. So these are things like bronze, silver, and gold. Now, you've probably seen this before because I put it on your table if you're doing a really, really good piece of work. Unfortunately, it's not the real World Cup. Okay, I made this many, many years ago. If it was the real World Cup, I'd be a very rich man. The real World Cup is made out of solid gold, and it's priceless. If someone said, "I'll buy the World Cup off you," they would say, "No, I'm sorry, it's not for sale." But it is solid gold, and it does weigh a lot. If you took all of the gold in the world, melted it down and made it into a cube, how big would that cube be? Well, if you've ever heard of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, you could push that cube underneath the main arches of the Eiffel Tower. So that's all the gold in the world ever. So that's why it is so precious. There are metals that are more precious. For example, if you've ever heard of platinum, if you melted all the platinum in the world down and made it into a cube, it would fit inside the average front room. So there's not much of that around. And there is a metal called rhodium that, again, if you melted it down into a cube, it would fit on the palm of your hand. So the more rare a metal is, the more expensive it gets. And I've got a piece of titanium here. This is a blade from a jet engine. So when you see a jet engine and it's got that great big fan with lots of little blades in, and that sucks the air into the jet engine before it's mixed with fuel and then ignited and blasted out of the back. So this is a titanium blade from a jet fighter, a Russian jet fighter, and it's incredibly tough. This is the thing about titanium; it's really, really tough. So when it's spinning around and it's thousands of feet up in the air, going at 600, 700, 1,000 miles an hour, you do not want this breaking. So this is made out of a very, very tough metal called titanium. The third and final family of metals is when metals have been experimented with and they've been mixed together. Now we call those alloys, and probably the most famous alloy would be aluminium. I've got a drinks can here. In the old days, the first cans were made using steel, and after a while, obviously, if you put something liquid in there, they're going to go rusty. So aluminium does not rust, but another great thing about it, it's very, very light. So it was invented by the Americans about 100 years ago. They call it aluminum. We call it aluminium. But they started using it on their aircraft many, many, many years ago. Aircraft used to be made out of wood and canvas. Uh, and then they started to think about, well, what metals could we use? We obviously can't use a heavy metal, otherwise the plane's not going to get off the ground. So aluminium is strong, but it is very, very light. So next time you go on a flight on a plane, a lot of that plane will have been made out of aluminium. And that's one of the reasons why aluminium was chosen for this wind power project, because it is light. So you want something that when the wind blows, it's going to catch and it is going to rotate. Also, if this is going to be outside, you don't want something that's going to rust. And also, another reason why this metal was chosen is if you have never worked with metal before, you don't want to work with a metal that is too tough for you to bend or too tough for you to cut. So the great thing about aluminium is when we do use the hand tools and we have to bend it and we have to file it and shape it, it's not going to be as difficult as you might think, because it is a softer metal, it is an easier metal to work with. So that will be in year 7, but we will, before we get to year 7, we will be talking about metals again. So if you want to go on the internet, if you want to have a look around your house, try and work out, if you can see if there's any copper or brass, or ask your folks at home, is there any gold around? It might be something like a gold ring. Some people have gold fillings in their teeth. But, just have a look around. Okay, so stay safe. And there are going to be some videos coming up where, particularly for you, Year 5, we're going to be talking about how to use the machines. Because when you come back in Year 6, you will be using a lot more machinery. And I'm going to show you how to use it safely and carefully so that you know what you're doing